Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. As ever, I am Paul Morrow here on the Ops Desk, and today we have a really interesting guest. We have the woman who is taking on the notorious Alvin Bragg here in Manhattan, perhaps one of the most notorious district attorneys in the country. We have Maron, former defense attorney. She was a public defender for over 20 years, and now she's going to the prosecution side up against Alvin Bragg. So first of all, Maud, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So give us a thumbnail of your background, your career, and what led you to this point.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I worked at the Legal Aid Society, for over 2 decades. I worked as a criminal defense attorney in the Manhattan office, in the Bronx office. I also worked as their director of training, so training the new lawyers who were coming in. Right. I did some teaching at Cardozo Law School. And then, I was a full-time mom for a little while. I have 4 kids that I'm raising here in Manhattan. They're all in public school, and I got very involved in advocating for good education in New York City public schools. I founded an organization back in, it was 2019, really, that we started working on these issues to support meritocracy in public schools, to support academic excellence. For some unknown reason, our former mayor and some school chancellors back thought that that was somehow the wrong way to go about it. They were, they had this idea about education that I strongly disagree with. Anyway, I spent a lot of years working on education issues, forming this organization and working hard. But public safety remains, of course, sort of the number one issue that you have to deal with when you're a New Yorker.
Of course, and it's in your blood. So look, you've been in the trenches, you've seen what goes on. What is it? I mean, it's a big career jump, and it's a big difference from what you had done in the past. So right. What is it that inspires you to say, you know what, I'm going to be the one to step up and take on Alvin Bragg in Manhattan?
Right. Well, I've run for office before, and I was a Democrat for many years. I've switched parties for this run, but I ran as a Democrat for city council and for Congress. My politics haven't changed that much. I'm what I consider a pragmatic centrist. And I really do think that most people want good public safety. And it's like, it's not a right thing or a left thing, a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. So it's not, I think of it as so pragmatic. Like what?
Yeah, so common sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's going on in our city, as you mentioned, Bragg is a little notorious. Why? Because he's one of those Soros-backed quote unquote progressive. I don't really think it's true progressivism, but it's trying to pass it off as being progressive to decarcerate, which is a fancy word for saying let a lot of people out of jail.
Right, exactly.
And push these like really radical extreme policies like cashless bail and not prosecuting certain crimes. Alvin Bragg wrote this thing called the Day One Memo.
Oh, I've read it.
Oh yeah.
We've talked about it, yeah.
Insane. Where it's a list. He just gets elected to be the chief prosecutor of Manhattan, and he says, let me tell you about all the things I'm not going to prosecute.
Yeah, well, amazing. I know. And then they wonder why the subways are in the condition that they're in, because one of the things he's decided he's not going to prosecute is theft of service, which is fare jumping essentially on the subways. Right. And, if you take that whole statute off the books from where I sit, which is he was the one who led the charge on this. And now, as I understand it, at least 4 out of the 5 prosecutors in the city, the district attorneys, don't prosecute that charge. What you've done now is you've realistically repealed a statute. And this is not prosecutorial discretion where you're looking at an individual case, a discrete case, one discrete case. You're looking at the 4 corners of it, and you're looking at what went on. Should we go this way? Should we go that way? What serves the interests of justice best? No, we're just going to repeal a statute. That's the legislature's job. That's not his job. Am I wrong?
Paul, you are 100% correct. And I do think it's a real abuse of the idea of prosecutorial discretion. It's not discretion to decide which laws you want to enforce. Right. It's discretion to say in this individual case with this individual defendant with these particularized facts, these facts warrant a certain kind of application of the law, a certain amount of discretion. It's never meant, prosecutorial discretion was never meant to say, oh, you can pick and choose which laws you want to enforce. That's not how it works.
No, of course not. Not in our system, and that's crazy. But nobody calls them on it in this town, except for a few people like you and I. And obviously, it's why we are where we are. So I got to ask you. Look, some of the numbers are better. Some of the violent numbers are better. Although I see certain things creeping back up. I'm a
Mhm.
little suspicious of some of the numbers that they put out because so many people have gotten sort of so beaten down with the system
Right,
that we don't get the calls, the 911 calls that we used to
right.
get. So I'm going to ask you a very blanket question. What is your first move, day one, as District Attorney Maron?
I've said this again and again. It's to rip up that day one memo and to instruct every assistant district attorney in the office that if somebody breaks the law, then you prosecute that person. Obviously, you need it to be a good arrest. You need the police to do their job on the street and to do everything by the book. But you have to go back to a system where you are prosecuting all of the crimes. And if there is a crime that our legislators in Albany think should no longer be a crime, let them do their job and change
Sure.
the law. But when you're the assistant district attorney who's sitting in the early case assessment bureau reviewing the arrest that the officer has made on the street, if it's a crime, you prosecute that crime.
Now, one of the things you do as a district attorney is you set the tone for the instruction, the training for all your assistant
Mhm.
DAs, including the newbies that come in. They get trained. We were talking last night to Pat Dugan, who's running against Krasner in Philadelphia, and he was talking about the fact that Krasner trains his district attorneys when they come in, essentially to be defense attorneys. He
Mhm.
hires defense attorneys, and he literally tells them, "You're now a public defender with a budget." Apparently, that's one of the things he says to them. Krasner is off the hook. He makes Alvin Bragg look like Elliot Ness. But that said, we have a little bit of the same thing going on here where I hear from old colleagues and stuff that so many cases, so many things they bring down get DP, decline prosecution. And it really feels to me like we're just starting to look the other way. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I think have been falling through the cracks. And we talked about theft of service. I want to talk about marijuana because one of the gripes you hear in terms of quality of life, like I said, I see some numbers, I distrust others, but there's no denying that the quality of life stuff in this city has cratered. All
Mhm.
right. You just have to walk around. I live in Hell's Kitchen. All I can do is walk around Midtown. All you do is smell weed. The tourists are aghast about it. Mothers with their kids can't believe what they're seeing. People have lost sight of the fact that, yes, we have legal now, some, very
Mhm.
few legal dispensaries. They haven't cleaned that up as much as they say. But you have these illegal weed shops all over the place, very hard to prosecute against. And you have open smoking weed all over the place. As
Mhm.
DA Marin, you going to
Mhm.
enforce against that?
You should enforce those laws wherever you can. I mean, we used to enforce 22003, which is,
Right.
criminal
Narcotics, right.
possession, in the seventh degree. And there's a lot of reasons why you prosecute. Like one, is because if it's on the books as a crime, you can prosecute it. But also there's two things. There's pretending like marijuana is a totally harmless drug, and this is a bigger conversation about whether or not we should even have legalized marijuana. I fall to the side of thinking that marijuana isn't as harmless as a lot of people think it
I
is.
agree.
But also, if you talk to law enforcement, when you make a car stop, a legitimate, valid car stop, and you have the driver roll down the window and ask for registration and you smell weed, that is a reason, see weed, when you see a drug or you see something that gives you additional probable cause to search the car, um, those were often the sort of stops that turned up guns, that
Guns, of
turned up
course.
things that are really dangerous, the sort of the proactive law enforcement that we want officers to do, to pretend like every single arrest that involves marijuana is some poor hapless little hippie just smoking a joint on the corner and
Mm.
not, but it's like it defies the actual reality of what we know is happening out on the street. So yes, I do think there's plenty of room to prosecute while also not giving a high school kid who's just goofing around a criminal record for the rest of his life. Like that's where prosecutorial discretion comes in, and where you absolutely should be mindful of the fact that not everything deserves, the most serious prosecution in the world, but you don't take away the ability of cops and prosecutors and judges who actually see these cases come through the courthouse to use the discretion that they know to prosecute people who should be prosecuted.
I mean, I think it feels like common sense, and the way you articulate it is so clear because You know, in a lot of ways, I got to use a metaphor, unfortunate metaphor here. It's a gateway drug very often to a bigger arrest, not
Mm-hmm.
to harder drugs necessarily.
Yep.
Although the weed is not the weed that they had when I was a kid. The weed now is like 10 times stronger. But like you say, you know, you can do a car stop, you get hit in the face with a cloud of marijuana. Now, of course, you have cyber. In fact, you have a potential DWI situation, but you have the situation where if you pull a guy out of the car, now you got to inventory the car. Look at this. There's a machine gun in the back seat. What are we into
Mm-hmm.
here?
Mm-hmm.
So that stuff has completely gone away. And so when I hear, okay, the numbers are down, the numbers are down, I say, yeah, because nobody's policing. Of course, certain numbers are down.
And let me say two other things about the numbers are down. One, you made a good point about Krasner being a defense attorney. We've got the same thing going on in here. That day one memo was a gift to defense lawyers.
Oh,
You
God,
don't
yeah.
have to worry about any of this. We're going to do it for you before it even gets to your desk. And as someone who worked as a defense attorney for many years, like I understand that, very well. But also, Bragg used to have something called the data dashboard on his website, which was all the numbers of
I
arrests,
remember it.
executions, and reductions in Manhattan. When they're talking about numbers going down, they're talking about citywide.
All right.
Bragg has some of the worst numbers in this city, borough by borough. And so what he's doing is hiding his particularly bad numbers in the whole New York City numbers.
Right.
So
So,
he doesn't want people to know what a bad job in particular he's doing when it comes to crime. So even during the debate I had with him last week, he said, well, those numbers are down and Manhattan is part of that. And if you didn't, if you didn't follow it, what you think, it's like, well, yeah, in any array of numbers, there's always one that's the worst, the outlier, and that's Alvin Bragg.
wow. So, and he took that database, that dashboard down,
Been
right?
down for like 18 months and he
Yeah.
hasn't put it back up, and now
Nor will he.
people call him on it.
Yeah. They're just completely sort of indifferent to the empirical evidence against them here. And, it's something to see, but we see it every day. I mean, listen, I grew up here, lived here almost all my life, and the city is getting to the point where it looks almost as bad as it did in the 70s. It's really starting to look grungy, and the tourists are going to catch on. We're going to lose all that money. Larger discussion, as you say. Let's move on to a couple more specific things here. Now, some of this stuff is going to be outside your purview as a district attorney, but I'm curious about what you think about Rikers, because this is going to be a downward pressure on anybody who's a district attorney, because we're about to lose roughly about 30% of our beds for jail beds now. Not long-term prison, but either people just arrested or people being brought down from upstate so you can adjudicate the case. So in other words, we're going to have no place to put these people. It's downward pressure on the ability to arrest people. Do you see it that way?
That's what it was designed to do, to
Right.
have fewer and fewer people in jail, fewer cases where you could actually incarcerate someone. Look, this is a perfect example of something where I ran as a Democrat in 2021, and in, 2019, 2020, I was out campaigning on these issues, and now I'm running as a Republican. Well, guess what? My position hasn't changed at all. It was
Right.
exactly the same.
Right.
Ran as one of those common sense Democrats who said we absolutely cannot afford to close Rikers Island.
Right.
Colossally expensive. It's predicated on a bunch of wishful thinking and bad ideology and not reality and accurate law enforcement. And it's just absurd. Who says we are going to spend billions? I mean, the estimates back then were around 7 or 8 billion, and it's already skyrocketed to like double that. We're going to
It always does.
always, and we're going to spend, in the range of 17, 18 billion dollars. They're now saying to have fewer beds in worse places. Like
Yeah.
instead of Rikers Island, which is an island in between three boroughs, which is a perfect place for a jail, we're going to build what they call borough-based jails or community jails, one of which is not that far from my house, right down there, where they tore down the Manhattan House of Detention. It's now a big pile of rubble.
Yeah.
And instead they're going to build there, believe it or not, the world's tallest jail. I mean, of all stupid things, this was the tail end of Bill de Blasio. And,
Yeah.
I'm running in the DA's race, which is very important, but I'll give a shout out to bad choices my beloved city is making in the mayoral race. If we all thought Bill de Blasio was bad, Zoran Mamdani is going to be worse. And ridiculously, he cites Bill de Blasio as a mayor that he thought was a good mayor.
He says he was the best. He says he literally was the best mayor that he has seen. And my understanding is that de Blasio was going to have a hand in The
Yeah.
policy, I think, frankly, De Blasio probably needs a job, and he's going to be in there. So let's get to Mamdani,
Yeah.
because look, you're an elected position. He doesn't own you, but you would be beholden to the governor. The governor can remove the DAs for cause. He can even remove, or she can remove the mayor for cause as well. But ultimately, you're pretty independent as a district attorney. You're elected. You have your own fiefdom. And one of the things that the DAs are going to have to come to terms with in some way, shape, or form is the fact that Donald Trump is not going away relative to the ICE issue. We
Mhm.
saw him poke his toe in the water a little bit on Canal Street recently. Everybody melted down over 9 arrests, I believe it was. And of course, the guys are right back. And everybody misses in all the apoplexy the fact that if the district attorney and the NYPD were allowed to do their job, or wanted to do their job, because I think PD would do it, but Bragg won't, and arrest these guys and then hand them over to ICE because there's warrants on them. I'm not talking about a civil detainer or
Right.
something that they just wrote up administratively. I'm talking about a judicial warrant now for removal. They
Mhm.
just come right back, and the people on Canal Street have to live with the conditions down there. Real quick, Maud, I was down there recently. Not only could I not walk down the street because of all the vendors and how they were crowded around, they were roasting, like, I think it was goat meat or something on the street. There were three braziers of like hibachis. I
Yeah.
couldn't get down. I turned the cars. I'm in the middle of a barbecue. It was bizarre. So
Yeah.
I got to ask you, you're going to inherit that mantle as the DA. How are you going to handle this thing with ICE and deportations?
Yeah, I live very close to Canal Street, so I know exactly what you were talking about. It got so bad that it would delay your ability to leave the subway because there was such a narrow path of Canal
Right.
Street that you could walk down that people were, instead of like flooding out of the subway when you get off the cars,
Sure.
like queuing up below to just get out and get up there. So like that's an untenable situation. We can't handle it. And you couldn't be more right that if we handled it on the local level, there'd be no question or need for the federal agents to be here. But the truth is, like, in the courthouse for years, for always, there
Yeah.
is an interaction between the federal government and the state government, and there are valid warrants, and you hold people and turn them over. Now, there is, to be clear, we have a lot of undocumented people in New York, and you don't want to have a situation where undocumented people are afraid to report crime or to give testimony against somebody accused of crime. So you do want to make sure that the criminal, because you know what, that's another favor to the criminals, because it says here's a class of people that you can abuse and they
Right.
will always be too afraid to call the police. So you want to be careful and not do that. Giuliani knew that. That's again not a left wing or a right wing issue. That's a common sense issue of
That's right.
how you run a government. But this ridiculous thing of tearing your hair out when there are federal officers who have a legitimate value, and all the people screaming on the streets are yelling. It's like, this isn't Argentina in 1974. People are not being disappeared. Warrants are being effectuated.
That's right.
And I just think, yeah, if we did a better job on a local level, it wouldn't even be an issue. We wouldn't even have to be fussing about federal agents because you would handle it internally.
I see the polling, and it's literally now from the Pew Institute. So I want to be clear who I'm citing, which is nonpartisan. 97% of Americans, 97, you couldn't get 97% of Americans to agree that we all breathe oxygen.
Yeah.
97% say that criminals, people here who commit crimes or who are wanted on crimes, got to go.
Yeah.
That's it. If you just applied that metric, you would tamp it down. But of course, everybody uses it politically. And of course, it becomes what it becomes. So I think that there's a common sense solution there that would make most of this issue go away.
We've seen everything from people who are here who have deportation orders against them or who are just here illegally, who have committed heinous crimes
Terrible.
and killed people, to things like where people who are here illegally or people who just came in through Joe Biden's like open border who are getting like commercial licenses to drive trucks that they have no idea how to drive and they can't read the signs on the street, and we're having massive like horrible vehicular accidents. And you need to have a system of law and order. You need to have a controlled immigration system. I think that's why you get these high numbers of Americans agreeing that something needs to be done, because you see the downside, the really serious and dangerous downside, when you don't enforce immigration law.
And the city is billions in the hole. Our budget's completely blown out. And yet, all of this money, and if you really, again, drill down on it, I did a lot of this kind of work when I did counterterrorism. The bodegas are doing massive EBT fraud and all kinds. They're just ripping the system off. The people know a lot of them are druggies. They know to come in, use the SNAP benefits. They charge something they never take. They get 50% cash and that kind of stuff. And it's not sexy. It's
Right.
very hard to get them, but I did a bunch of those kinds of cases because I tried to make the point that the money is going to bad guy areas. The time doing counterterrorism, I was worried about Yemen. I was worried about various other areas. All right, so these are the things that I think where common sense can prevail as long as it's in the articulation. But of course, you're always going to be up against the media. And I got to bring something else here to the fore because you're running not only against Bragg, but you're running against the media in this town, which is monolithic. We all know that. And one of the things they got behind, but not entirely full-throatedly, was Bragg's case against Trump. Now we
Mhm.
see it's being appealed. You know, we got a new wrinkle there. We knew it was going to be. That's going to go up the chain. But in that seat, you inherit that case.
Mhm.
Where would you go with that case? What would you do with it?
Well, a lot of people said like the safe answer is to say, "Oh, that will be a case that I have to deal with, so you can't say anything about it." But that's not really my style. My style is to tell you what I think, which is it's a ridiculous case. It should have never been brought in the first place, and everybody sort of knew that. The SEC, that it was an elections compliance case, knew that it was, or the Federal Elections Commission, knew that it was a ridiculous case, or just like a not a case to be prosecuted. And even Bragg turned away from it on first pass.
He did.
And then took another look at it and thought, oh, I can be a good little foot soldier for my political tribe,
Right.
and that's not the way any prosecutor should make. Both Alvin Bragg and Letitia James sort of prosecuted on this thing of like, we're going to use our law enforcement office to go after the guy that everybody in our team hates. That's shocking, really. I mean, we've all kind of grown immune to it on some level because there were
Yeah.
so many prosecutions of President Trump. But it's really it's a terribly dangerous road to go down for a democracy. You don't lock up your political enemies on trumped up, made up charges. It degrades the people bringing the charges and the people who have to fight out from under it. It's really wrong. I think that's what that case was. I think it's ridiculous to say, I forget if it was 37 or 38 felony counts, but
Yeah. 34, I think.
all right, well,
Yeah.
north
Someplace north of 30. Yeah.
a ridiculous number of cases for check writing, for a victimless crime, for a not for a crime that the relevant, federal elections agency didn't even want to prosecute. It's just, to me, I can't pretend that there's not a lot of nuance or I'll have to look into it. And no, it's just ridiculous.
Well, good for you for giving a
All
straight answer, man.
state.
Good for you for giving a straight answer because a lot of people won't, that I've talked to, and it's going to be overturned because it's internally inconsistent. The
Of
way he
course
got
it's
it
going to be
debunked to a
overturned.
felony to beat
Of
the statute,
course.
it's a ridiculous case, and it
Yeah.
really was an embarrassing flex. And
Mhm.
I suspect that in his heart of hearts, down deep, I think he'd like to have that one back. I got to move on. We only have so much time, but I got to talk now about another big case that you would inherit in that seat, and that is Luigi Mangione. Now, not a lot of nuance there in terms of whether he should be prosecuted or not, but I want to get into something that's a little arcane, which is the terrorism charge.
Mhm.
Now, I defended Bragg on this charge because a number of people came at me and said, terrorism, are they kidding with this charge? This is not a terrorism charge. I said, listen, this
Mhm.
was an ideological purpose. I was the first person, my team was the first person to use the CT charges, the kind of terrorism charges post 9/11. They were new. Nobody had really tested them out. And we got the first 3 or 4 convictions. So those charges exist. And in my estimation, Mangione
Mhm.
qualifies. It
Mhm.
was a murder as a crime of terrorism because he wanted to influence the population. He had that manifesto, black letter. And
Right.
yet they blew it because it got thrown out.
Right.
Now, have you heard, are they appealing that or where's that going? Have you heard anything?
Know if they're appealing it. I mean, I would tend to agree with you, but I also think you're somewhat safe as a prosecutor sometimes to overcharge or to go for the highest charge you can, knowing that if that gets thrown out, that
Mm,
they didn't lose the whole case, they can still go forward.
right.
I find that case to just be horrifying, and I find it to be sort of the pinnacle of what's a more, or one of the pinnacles, Charlie Kirk's murder being one of them too, like this worrying trend of some Americans thinking that violence is an okay way to solve political differences.
Sure.
I find that really, really troubling and worrisome, and something that we really have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the lesson nationally that to take away from that. But I was heartened that he went with that charge, and then I was disheartened to see it go. But like you said, you still have the murder charge. But I frankly think that they blew it. I don't see how they didn't manage to get that past the judge. Maybe the judge had a bias against the charge or something. I don't know. That statute is held up. I want to go to something, man. The last sort of charge I want to go to here, which is I think if there's one thing that's visible to New Yorkers that really bothers them about the quality of life stuff, maybe the homelessness and all of that, okay, fair enough. The fact that we don't lock up perps in this town, we lock up our toothpaste, right?
I knew you were going to say it,
Yeah, right. The
but
shoplifting.
absolutely everybody talks about it. And this is what I've said about this. If it's the worst thing you had to deal with, okay, fine. It's really annoying, but like it's the worst thing you have to deal with. But it's not the worst thing you have to deal with. The worst thing you have to deal with is really deeply mentally deranged people who are on the subways,
Right.
weapons, who are a danger. But that locked up toothpaste is totally the symbol of a system that is working on behalf of the thieves instead of the people who pay for their goods. It's working on behalf of the criminals instead of the everyday New Yorkers. And until we go back to a system where you lock up retail theft regularly, again, not the first time, not a high school kid stealing makeup at Sephora for, like some stupid thing. You get your community service, you get something, but the repeat recidivist shoplifters, the people that are boosting stuff out of stores to go resell it as part of a resale ring, you have to prosecute those cases aggressively, because otherwise, I was talking to a neighbor of mine this morning who said, I've been in this pharmacy where I've seen people with a bag just putting stuff in,
Oh, they're completely casual about it.
yeah, plain, no one's trying to hide their theft anymore. And that's a result of Alvin Bragg's policies. And we need better policies, and we need a better DA.
Again, it seems to me like common sense. You have, as I understand it, according to the New York Times, which is, not exactly some crazy right-wing band of zealots, saying that there are about 330 recidivists
Oh, yeah.
relative to shoplifting that do about a third.
Yeah.
You
The
know,
NYPD could, in a matter of weeks, have
oh,
most of those people behind bars. Like, this is a very solvable problem. It's not being solved because Alvin Bragg does not want to solve it.
it really does seem that way. And look, let's be clear. As the DA, you are constrained by the policies and the laws that have been put in place, not only by the mayor and the city council, but by Albany. So you can only do what you can do. And they've institutionalized a lot of things against you, whether it's bail reform, discovery reform, raise the age, clean slate. There's a whole litmus, what's the word I'm looking for? Lineup or whatever. Yeah, a whole list, a whole roster of
Yeah,
stuff that is against you,
right.
but you can still get it done, certainly better than we are now, and you can be a voice for reason without. It's funny, Alvin Bragg's not very public, if you notice.
He's been hiding this whole year. Lucky for him, I have not had the kind of funding that I wanted to have to run this race against him. I really wish I had, but I think this has been a super interesting year in New York, and I'll tell you why. People always say like, oh, Republicans can't win in New York, even though we know from like Michael Bloomberg switching from Democrat to Republican that it can happen. But what I was telling people, including some very big donors at the end of in 2024 and this year, was actually, you cannot run common sense moderate people in the Democratic primary anymore. It's too far left. Like, you have to start building up a bench of Republican candidates. And they were all like, oh, she's a nice lady, but yeah, whatever. Republicans can't win. And then Zoran Mamdani won. And like, as far as I'm concerned, that proves me right. It's my like proof of case that like the Democratic primary voter is really, really extremely far left at this point.
Yeah.
And that, you know, let's just say I've been ahead of the curve on some ideas before, and I am on this one. And I really think that people are going to have to come around to the fact that if the Democratic Party is the Zoran Mamdani, AOC, Bernie Sanders party, the sort of what I call the least bad Democrat theory is not going to win the day anymore. You can't keep running someone who's like a little bit less extreme than
Right.
most extreme people. You have to run an alternative. And we're a two-party system. The way I see it is the alternative is in a moderate New York Republican Party.
And I think history has shown that those of us of a certain age know that when we went through the 70s and 80s, ultimately that's what gave us with Giuliani.
Yes, totally.
And, I don't see any Giulianis on the horizon here, but one thing I think that is instructive about Giuliani is that he lost the first time.
Yep.
People forget that. It was almost like a process, like a grieving process for New York City
Yep.
for them to get over the 4 stages of grief before 5 stage, whatever, before they finally came around to say, we got to elect the guys who are going to clean the town up. And that's why I think you're right. Interesting year, and I think it's going to be very interesting going forward if there's anything left to build on. Look, we're out of time. I want you to sum us up with the following. First of all, last point. You said you didn't get the kind of funding that you wanted. Is the Republican Party, is there anything to build on in this town sort of institutionally? Is the Republican Party completely DOA?
There's good people there, but there's not the infrastructure that we need or want. We have a really important governor's race coming up next year,
Yeah.
and I think Elise Stefanik is likely to be the, candidate, and she would be a great candidate. And I'd love to see us here in New York City be able to support her and help her, because you need a certain percentage of votes in New York City to win statewide, and so that's really crucial and critical. But I'll say this: there are Republicans on the ground in New York who have been demoralized for a long time because you can't, especially in Manhattan where I live, because sometimes you go to vote and you can't even find a Republican on the ballot because people
Yeah,
don't
that's
run.
right. Yeah.
There's also all these Democrats who are looking for an alternative to their party that, as Ronald Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. There's Dominicans uptown, Jewish voters everywhere, Chinese voters, voters of every age and every stripe that are like, I'm not down with this communist telling me he wants, government run grocery stores and he wants to defund the police. They don't like having their toothpaste locked up or having crazy people on the subway with weapons. Like nobody's voting for that. The rhetoric on the left sounds good. The reality is not so good. And so I think the Republican Party has a huge opportunity ahead of it. I'd love to see a little bit more robust effort to capture some of those votes.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be there. I think they got to rebuild it. I bumped into it myself down through the years a couple of times, and that's why I ask. And like I said, I hope I don't want to sign the epitaph for them, but they better wake up
Yeah.
because just they're surrendering now, and that's not doing anybody any good. You have a couple of endorsements, as I recall it. I read that Post has already endorsed you, correct?
Indeed, indeed.
Uh,
The New York Post makes great decisions all the time.
There you go. Listen, that's a big one because a lot of us who read the papers, you can tell who's who in this town by the
Yeah.
newspapers on the subway, right? And it's a big endorsement. Good for you. And
Thank you
tell
so much.
us, just to take us out, where people can find you if they want to donate, they want to follow you going forward. Where can they find Maud Maron?
Please follow me on my website, maudformanhattan.com. You can follow me on any social media. It's always my name, Maud Maron, so very easy to find. Donations, even at this late stage, are super helpful because we're out there at those polling sites trying to make sure everybody sees my name when they walk in. And tell your friends to vote.
We got to vote. You're 100% right. You can't complain if you don't vote.
Yes.
And my understanding is with the early voting is very, very high. So I think people are getting out. I don't know what that means, but hopefully it's a good sign. So listen, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so, so much for having me and for a great conversation. I got to say, you actually understand what this role is and what it does better than a lot of people who I've talked to in this case.
I've dealt with it. Listen, I
It
didn't
was
get
a real
to
pleasure.
2/3 of what I wanted to get to, but I was in the trenches too, and I know what you're up against here. We wish you Godspeed, and I have a feeling, however it goes on Election Day, that's not the last we're going to hear of Maud Maron, and we hope that's accurate. So, folks, thank you for joining us today on the Ops Desk Podcast. I am Paul Morrow, and all of you out there, please stay safe.